What happens when the world's most powerful voice meets the world's quietest? Noah William, a billionaire whose whisper could crumble stock markets, dined at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. He was a titan of industry, a man who saw people as pawns on his global chessboard. That night, his target was a humble waitress named Elena. He hurled an insult, a drop of verbal poison meant to wither her spirit. But he made one critical mistake. He muttered his final, cruelest words in his native tongue, a language he thought was his secret shield. He never imagined that this forgotten waitress possessed a key to his past, and that her response would not just silence him, but shatter the very foundation of his life. This is the story of how a few words of a forgotten language unraveled a billionaire's empire of anger. Ethelgard wasn't a restaurant. It was a sanctuary for the gods of finance and power, nestled in a quiet, cobbled street in Soho. Its interiors were a hushed symphony of dark mahogany, burnished brass, and the low murmur of consequential conversations. To work there was to be invisible, a silent phantom catering to the whims of men and women who shaped the world. For Elena Petrova, invisibility was a cloak she had worn for 3 long years. It paid the rent on her tiny, book-cluttered apartment in Queens and allowed her to fade into a city that had once promised her everything and given her nothing. Elena was a ghost with a history. Her colleagues saw a woman in her late 20s with weary, intelligent eyes, hair always tied back in a severe bun, and an unnerving stillness. They knew she was reliable, efficient, and never ever broke composure. They didn't know about the doctorate in comparative linguistics she'd been forced to abandon, or the academic papers she had published under a name now tainted by scandal. They didn't know that she spoke 6 languages fluently and could read 3 more. To them, she was just Elena, the quiet waitress who was unnervingly good at her job. Her most dreaded customer, the man whose presence curdled the air and sent a ripple of fear through the staff, was Noah William. William wasn't just wealthy, he was a force of nature. A self-made titan in the brutal world of private equity, he had a reputation for corporate evisceration. He was tall, impeccably dressed in bespoke suits that cost more than Elena's annual salary, and possessed a glacial stare that could make seasoned CEOs tremble. He treated the staff at Ethelgard not as people, but as malfunctioning appliances. A fork slightly askew, a water glass filled a centimeter too low, a shadow of hesitation. Any perceived imperfection was met with a cold, cutting remark that was all the more devastating for its quiet delivery. Tonight he was at his corner table. Table 1, the throne, as the staff called it. It offered a panoramic view of the dining room while affording him a degree of privacy. He was alone, which was always worse. When he had guests, he wore a mask of civility. Alone, the mask came off. His phone was pressed to his ear, his knuckles white as he gripped it. "No, Marcus, you listen to me," he hissed into the device, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You tell the board that if they even think of entertaining Thorne's offer, I will liquidate every asset, burn the company to the ground, and dance on the ashes. Is that clear?" Elena approached the table with the silent tread of a cat. She knew the rhythm of his moods. The tight clench of his jaw meant his multi-billion-dollar deal with a Japanese tech firm was faltering. The restless tapping of his fingers meant he was hemorrhaging money on the stock market. Tonight, every signal blared red alert. She topped up his water, the crystal pitcher making no sound against the rim of the glass. He didn't acknowledge her. He was a predator, and his focus was entirely on the kill. "I don't pay you for excuses," he continued into the phone. "I pay you for results. Fix it, now." He ended the call with a vicious tap of his finger, tossing the phone onto the plush velvet of the seat beside him. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with violent energy. He finally looked up, and his cold gray eyes landed on Elena. It wasn't a look of recognition, but of appraisal, as if he were inspecting a piece of furniture. "The wine," he clipped. "The 05 Chateau Margaux. It's breathing." "Yes, sir. As you requested," Elena replied, her voice perfectly neutral. "It's over-aerated," he snapped. "The fruit is fading. It's turning. Did you decant it an hour ago, as I specifically instructed your manager?" 55 minutes ago, sir. I decanted it myself. I timed it." Noah William leaned back, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He enjoyed this. The small cruelties were an appetizer before the main course of his corporate battles. 55 minutes. And in those 5 minutes of incompetence, you've managed to ruin a $3,000 bottle of wine? Remarkable. Elena stood her ground, her face a placid mask. Would you like me to bring you another bottle, Mr. William? And have you ruined that one as well? No, thank you. I'll tolerate your mistake. Just as I tolerate the general inadequacy that seems to be a prerequisite for employment here. Each word was a flick of a whip. The other staff members, though pretending to be busy, were listening, their bodies tense. They'd all been on the receiving end of his venom. They pitied Elena, but were relieved it wasn't them. Elena simply nodded. I will inform the sommelier of your displeasure, sir. Your appetizer will be out shortly. She turned to leave, but his voice, sharp as broken glass, stopped her. Wait. She turned back. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time, and what he saw he despised. He saw a nameless, faceless servant, a nobody, a symbol of the mediocrity he had fought his entire life to escape. He saw a person without ambition, without drive, trapped in a life of servitude, and in his current state of high-stakes rage, he decided to make her the focal point of all his frustration. What is your name? He demanded. Elena, sir. Elena, he repeated the name as if it tasted foul. Tell me, Elena, is this your life's ambition? Carrying plates for men like me? Is this the pinnacle of your existence? The question hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a direct strike, meant to wound, to humiliate. Elena's composure remained, a dam holding back a flood. I am a waitress, Mr. William, she said, her voice still even. You are, he sneered, leaning forward, and that's all you'll ever be, because you lack the spark, the fire. You're just empty, a ghost. He waved a dismissive hand. Get out of my sight. Go fetch my food. That's what you're good for. As she turned away, her back straight, her dignity a fragile shield, he muttered one last thing, a final, venomous barb not meant for her or anyone else to understand. It was a whisper of pure contempt, spoken in a language he believed was his and his alone in this city of millions. A language from a childhood he had long buried. He whispered in Welsh, a girl of nothing, without a soul. He leaned back, a grim satisfaction on his face, secure in his private insult. He watched her walk away, expecting to see a slump in her shoulders, a sign that his arrow had found its mark. But then she stopped. The world in Ethelgard seemed to hold its breath, the clinking of distant silverware, the soft jazz from the ceiling speakers, the hushed cadence of a dozen conversations. It all faded into a dull, distant roar for Noah William. His focus was entirely on the slender back of the waitress, Elena. He had thrown his final sharpest stone, a secret poison dart from his past, and he watched for its effect. He expected her to hurry away, perhaps to a hidden alcove to wipe away a tear of frustration. He expected the slight tremble of defeat. What he did not expect was for her to stop dead, her posture ramrod straight, 3 paces from his table. For a full 5 seconds, she didn't move. Noah felt a flicker of annoyance. Was she deaf as well as incompetent? Was she going to make a scene? Did you hear me? He said, his voice laced with impatience. I told you to go. Then she turned, not with the haste of a chastised servant, but with a slow, deliberate grace that was utterly arresting. The meek, invisible waitress was gone. The woman who faced him now had a fire in her eyes he hadn't seen before. The placid mask had fallen away, replaced by an expression of profound, soul-deep weariness, mixed with a spark of something that looked dangerously like defiance. Her lips parted. Noah braced himself for a tearful apology, a protest, or perhaps the manager rushing over to smooth things over. He was prepared for anything except the sound that came out of her mouth. It was Welsh, clear, crisp, and with a faint, almost academic accent that spoke of study rather than birthright. But it was undeniably the language of his childhood, the language his father had spoken. She replied softly in Welsh, I understand every word, sir. Still in Welsh, she added, and to tell you the truth, a soul is something money can never buy. The blood drained from Noah Williams' face. He felt a sudden, dizzying vertigo, as if the plush, carpeted floor of the restaurant had dropped away beneath him. His mind, a finely tuned machine that processed billion-dollar transactions and hostile takeovers without a flutter, simply stopped. The words echoed in his head, their meaning hitting him with the force of a physical blow. I understand every word, sir, and to tell you the truth, a soul is something money can never buy. It wasn't just the response, it was the language. Welsh. Here in the heart of Manhattan, from the lips of a nondescript waitress named Elena. It was impossible. It was a statistical anomaly so vast as to be a hallucination. He used that language as a shield, a private vault where he kept his ugliest thoughts. It was the tongue of the damp green valleys of his youth, a place in a time he had spent a lifetime and a fortune trying to forget. For her to speak, it was like she had picked the lock to his mind and was now standing in the doorway, looking at everything he kept hidden. The tables had turned with the velocity of a car crash. He, Noah William, the master of every room he entered, was suddenly naked, exposed. The insult he had thrown had boomeranged back, but it was no longer an insult. It was a judgment. The staff, sensing a shift in the oppressive atmosphere, glanced over. They couldn't understand the words, but they understood the tableau. The most powerful man in the room, pale and speechless, staring at the quietest waitress on staff, who was holding his gaze with an unwavering intensity. "What did you say?" Noah managed to choke out, his voice a hoarse whisper. The arrogance was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. "You heard me, Mr. William," Elena replied, switching back to English. But her tone was different now. The subservience was gone. She was speaking to him as an equal. "Or is it possible you only understand the language when you're using it to demean people?" The directness of the question was staggering. No one had spoken to Noah William like that in 20 years. Not his board members, not his rivals, not his ex-wives. He felt a surge of his old anger, a defense mechanism kicking in. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice regaining some of its steel, but it was brittle now. "I'm your waitress," she said, a bitter irony in her words. "The soulless girl of nothing, remember?" He flinched as if she had struck him. He had been cruel, yes, but he had never had his cruelty so precisely and eloquently handed back to him. He was a predator who had just discovered his prey had teeth, sharp ones. "That's not what I mean," he gritted out. "Where did you learn that?" "One picks things up," Elena said evasively, her eyes holding a story he suddenly, desperately wanted to know. "Here and there." "Don't play games with me," he snarled, a cornered animal. "That language, almost no one speaks it. Not here." "Perhaps you should be more careful then," she advised him, her voice chillingly calm. "The walls in this city have ears, and sometimes they understand." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if concluding their business. "I will get your appetizer now, sir. I'm sure you've waited long enough." Without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked toward the kitchen. This time there was no hesitation. Her steps were firm, her back straight. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a queen in exile. Noah Williams sat alone at his table, the buzzing restaurant fading once more into an irrelevant backdrop. The exquisite wine, the promise of a Michelin-starred meal, it all turned to ash in his mouth. He was no longer thinking about Marcus or the Thorn deal or the Japanese acquisition. His entire formidable intellect was focused on one burning, impossible question. Who was Elena? He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't call his lawyer or his broker. He called his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Gavriel. "Gavriel," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I have a name. Elena Petrova. She works at Ethelgard in Soho. I want to know everything. I want her birth certificate, her school records, her social security number, where she buys her coffee. Everything. And I want it by morning." He hung up, his heart pounding in his chest. This was no longer about a ruined dinner. This was about a ghost from his past appearing in the most unlikely of forms. He felt a sense of dread, but also a sliver of something else. Something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity and fear. Noah William did not sleep. His penthouse apartment, a glass box suspended 50 stories above Central Park, usually felt like the pinnacle of his dominion. Tonight, it felt like a cage. He paced the marble floors, the glittering panorama of New York City, a mocking testament to a power that suddenly felt hollow. The waitress's words in both Welsh and English played on a loop in his mind. A soul is something money can never buy. He had dismissed the concept of a soul as a sentimental fiction for the weak. His life was a testament to the tangible: assets, acquisitions, market share. Yet for the first time, he felt a profound and unsettling emptiness, a void that his billions couldn't fill. Her words had found a crack in his armor and slipped inside like a shard of ice. Just before dawn, his encrypted phone buzzed. It was a message from Gabriel, a single attachment, a heavily encrypted file named Petrova EE dossier. Noah poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid sloshing in his trembling hand, and opened the file on his tablet. The screen glowed in the dark room, illuminating his grim face. The first page was basic. Elena Petrova, age 29, born in a displaced persons camp in Germany to Russian parents. Naturalized as a U.S. citizen at age 8. No criminal record. A string of menial jobs for the past 3 years. Barista, bookstore clerk, and now waitress at Ethelgard. It was the profile of a nobody, just as he'd assumed. Then he swiped to the next page, and the next. And the carefully constructed world of Noah William began to fracture. The file detailed an academic career of breathtaking brilliance, a full scholarship to Columbia University at 16, a summa cum laude graduate in linguistics and philology, a doctorate from Oxford University, completed in a record 2 years. Her thesis, The Syntactic Fading of Brythonic Languages in Post-Industrial Diaspora, was cited as a landmark work. Noah's breath hitched. Brythonic languages, Welsh. He scrolled through a list of her published papers, her conference appearances. She was a prodigy, a rising star in a field so niche he barely knew it existed. She was fluent in Russian, German, English, French, Italian, and Spanish. Her academic specializations were listed as Celtic languages, with a particular focus on Welsh linguistic history. The dossier contained photos. One showed a vibrant, smiling young woman in an Oxford graduation gown, clutching her diploma. Her eyes were bright, full of a future that seemed limitless. It was the same woman, but a different person entirely from the weary, cloistered waitress he had tormented. What had happened? How does a brilliant Oxford academic end up serving him overpriced wine? The answer was on the final pages, under the heading, Academic Review and Dismissal. 3.5 years ago, Dr. Elena Petrova had been on the fast track to a professorship at a prestigious New England university. She was the protege of one of the world's most respected linguists, a Welshman named Professor David Llewellyn. The name hit Noah like a physical jolt. Llewellyn. He knew that name. It was a common Welsh name, of course, but a cold dread snaked its way up his spine. The report detailed a sudden, catastrophic scandal. Elena was accused of academic fraud. A rival academic, Dr. Annabel Croft, claimed that key sections of Elena's groundbreaking research had been plagiarized from her own unpublished work. An investigation was launched. Evidence was presented. Digital timestamps, drafts that seemed to support Croft's claim. The university, fearing a lawsuit and scandal, acted swiftly. Elena protested her innocence, claiming she was being framed, but the evidence seemed damning. Her mentor, Professor Llewellyn, defended her fiercely, but his word was not enough. He was old, semi-retired, and his influence was waning. The university committee, swayed by the seemingly irrefutable digital evidence, ruled against her. Dr. Elena Petrova was publicly disgraced. She was stripped of her academic titles, her publications were retracted, and she was blacklisted from every reputable institution in the world. Her career was not just over, it was annihilated. The dossier noted that 6 months after her dismissal, Professor David Llewellyn had passed away from a sudden heart attack. The file concluded with a note. Subject appears to have vanished from academic and social circles, re-emerging in low-wage service sector jobs in New York City. Noah stared at the screen, his mind racing, connecting dots he didn't even know existed. The language wasn't a coincidence. Her mentor, the man who had championed her, was Welsh, a professor, David Llewellyn. She hadn't just learned the language, she had been immersed in it, taught by a master. She had loved it enough to make it her life's work, and Noah had used that same beautiful, complex language, the language of her passion and her mentor, to call her a soulless girl of nothing. A wave of something akin to shame washed over him. It was a foreign, deeply uncomfortable feeling. He hadn't just insulted a waitress. He had desecrated a tomb. He had trampled on the ruins of a life he had helped to destroy in his own small, cruel way. But the name still bothered him. David Llewellyn. He strode over to a locked mahogany box on his bookshelf. He hadn't opened it in 30 years. His fingers, usually so steady, fumbled with the small brass key. Inside was a collection of things from a life he'd tried to erase. A few faded photographs, a child's crayon drawing of a red dragon, and a single worn book of poetry. The Mabinogion, a collection of Welsh folk tales. He opened the cover. On the inside, in faded blue ink, was a handwritten inscription. To my little eagle, Noah. May you always hear the music of the mountains, with all my love. Dad. His father's name was David. David Llewellyn William. He had dropped the William when Noah's mother had thrown him out, reverting to his birth name, Llewellyn, as he vanished from their lives. Noah stumbled back, the book falling from his grasp and landing with a soft thud on the expensive rug. It couldn't be. The world was vast. Llewellyn was a common name. It had to be a coincidence. It was a statistical improbability of staggering proportions. But as he stood there, in the heart of his sterile, self-made empire, with the ghost of a disgraced academic on his screen and the memory of a long-lost father in the air, Noah William knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that there was no coincidence. The waitress, Elena Petrova, wasn't just some random woman who happened to know Welsh. She was a link, a living, breathing connection to the father he thought was gone forever, the man he had spent his entire life hating for abandoning him. He now understood her defiance, the fire in her eyes. When he had insulted her, he hadn't just insulted a waitress. He had insulted the legacy of the one man who mattered to her, and she knew. He was sure of it. She knew who he was. Her response hadn't just been a clever retort. It had been a message. The following evening, Elena was polishing cutlery in the back service station of Ethelgard when the manager, a perpetually nervous man named Julian, approached her. "Elena," he said, wringing his hands. "Table 1. He's back. He's asking for you." A murmur went through the nearby staff. Everyone knew about the incident the night before. They had seen William's face, the color of ash, as Elena walked away. They had expected her to be fired. Instead, the beast had returned and was now demanding to see her. Elena felt a cold knot form in her stomach, but her expression remained calm. She had barely slept, replaying the confrontation in her mind. It had been a reckless, cathartic act of defiance she was sure would cost her the job she desperately needed. She had spent the day waiting for the call from Julian, telling her not to come in. The call never came. "He's asking for me by name?" she asked, her voice steady. "Insisting," Julian squeaked. "He told me he'll speak to no one else." "Elena, what did you say to him?" "The truth," she said simply, placing the last polished fork on the linen-lined tray. "I'll take the table." As she walked through the dining room, she felt the eyes of her colleagues on her. It was like walking into a lion's den, only this time she knew the lion's name. She had known from the moment she first saw him months ago. She had seen his photograph in an old treasured newspaper, clipping Professor Llewellyn kept tucked away in a book. A clipping announcing Noah Williams' first major acquisition. "Son of Welsh immigrant takes Wall Street by storm," the headline read. She had held her tongue for months, serving the son of the man she revered, biting back the bitter irony of it all. Last night he had pushed her too far. Noah William was sitting at the same table, but the man she saw tonight was different. The arrogant, dismissive predator was gone. In his place was a man coiled with a tense, nervous energy. His impeccable suit seemed more like armor than a display of wealth. He was not on his phone. He was simply staring at the untouched water glass, his hands clasped on the table. He looked up as she approached. His gray eyes, usually so cold and imperious, were now searching, haunted. "Elena," he said. Her name sounded different in his mouth today. Not an insult, but a question. "Mr. Williams," she replied, her voice professionally placid. "Welcome back to Ethelgard. May I get you something to drink?" "Stop," he said, his voice low but firm. "Stop the act. We both know this isn't about drinks." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please, sit down." For a waitress to sit with a guest was a cardinal sin at Ethelgard. Julian, watching from across the room, looked like he might faint. Elena hesitated for a moment, then slid gracefully into the chair. The power dynamic of the entire restaurant had just been shattered. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. He was studying her, trying to reconcile the woman in the dossier with the woman in front of him. She was meeting his gaze, her own expression unreadable. "Petrova is a Russian name," he began, his voice raspy. "My parents were political dissidents. They fled before I was born," she stated, offering no more than the basic facts. "You studied at Oxford," he continued, as if reciting from a script, "under Professor David Llewellyn." It was not a question. It was an accusation. Elena's mask of composure finally tightened. A flicker of pain crossed her features before she suppressed it. "He was my doctoral advisor," she confirmed, her voice barely a whisper. "He was the kindest, most brilliant man I have ever known." Noah leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. "He was my father." He said the words as if they were being ripped from his chest. He was testing her, waiting for a reaction, for a sign of surprise. He got none. Elena's gaze did not waver. "I know." The two words hung between them, more powerful than any corporate threat or legal jargon. They were the confirmation of everything he had suspected. Noah slumped back in his chair as if the air had been punched from his lungs. "How long have you known?" "I recognized your name the first time you dined here. I found an old article about you among his papers after he passed. He followed your career. He was proud of you." "Proud?" Noah scoffed, a bitter, broken sound. "He abandoned me. He walked out on my mother and me with nothing but the clothes on his back. He never called. He never wrote. He vanished. That's not pride. That's cowardice." The raw, 30-year-old pain of a little boy was evident in the billionaire's voice. And it was in that moment that Elena's carefully constructed wall of detachment crumbled, replaced by a fierce, protective loyalty to the memory of her mentor. "You're wrong," she said, her voice shaking with a sudden, intense emotion. "You are completely and utterly wrong. He didn't abandon you. He was forced out." Noah stared at her, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Forced out? My mother told me he left. He was a failed poet, a dreamer with no ambition who couldn't handle a real family." "Your mother lied," Elena said, her words sharp and clear. "Your father wasn't a failed poet. He was a brilliant academic. Your mother, she wanted a different life, a wealthier life. When she met the man who would become her second husband, she gave your father an ultimatum. Walk away with nothing and never contact his son again. Or she would use her new partner's money and lawyers to ruin him and ensure he never got custody. He was a poor academic with no resources. He couldn't fight her." Noah was shaking his head, a gesture of denial. "No, that's not true. She wouldn't." "He chose to disappear so you would have the life your mother wanted for you," Elena pressed on, her eyes now glistening with unshed tears. "He gave you up because he loved you. He wrote you hundreds of letters. She sent them all back, unopened. He sent birthday presents, Christmas gifts. They were all returned. He tried to call, but the number was always changed." She reached into the small pocket of her apron, her hand trembling. She pulled out a small, worn, folded piece of paper and slid it across the table. "He carried this with him until the day he died. It's the last letter she returned." Noah looked down at the paper. It was his mother's elegant, cruel handwriting on the front of the envelope. "Return to sender. No longer at this address." He slowly unfolded it. The letter inside was written in his father's familiar script, the words blurred in places as if by tears. It was dated on his 10th birthday. It spoke of his pride, his love, his hope that one day Noah would understand. It ended with a phrase in Welsh. The letter ended with a Welsh phrase, "My little eagle, fly high," the same words from the inscription in the book of poetry. Noah William, the man who moved markets and crushed competitors, began to weep. Not loud, racking sobs, but silent, agonizing tears that tracked down his face, leaving paths of moisture on his stony expression. The entire narrative of his life, the story of abandonment that had fueled his ruthless ambition, his disdain for weakness, his volcanic anger, was a lie. He wasn't the son of a coward. He was the son of a man who had sacrificed everything. His anger, his hardness, was a monument built on a faulty foundation, and it was now crumbling to dust. The world of Ethelgard ceased to exist for them. They were two people on a desolate island, surrounded by the wreckage of a life built on lies. Noah held the letter, his knuckles white, the fragile paper a sacred, devastating relic. The quiet confidence Elena had shown was now replaced by a raw vulnerability. She had just handed over the last piece of the man she considered her true family. "He talked about you," she said softly, her voice thick with memory. "Not often, it was too painful. But sometimes after a glass of wine, he would look at the fire and say, 'I wonder if my boy remembers the stories. He taught me Welsh, you know.' It felt like keeping a part of you alive for him. When he heard you used it in a business negotiation, it made the news. He was so proud. He said he remembers the music of the mountains." Noah looked up from the letter, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a maelstrom of emotions. Grief, rage, confusion. The music of the mountains. He used to say that. He could almost hear his father's gentle voice, a ghost from a past he had tried to kill. "All those years," Noah whispered, his voice cracking. "All those years I hated him. I built my entire life on the foundation of that hate. It drove me. It made me relentless. I thought if I became powerful enough, I would be the opposite of him. I wouldn't be weak. I wouldn't be a dreamer who runs away." "He wasn't weak," Elena insisted, her loyalty a burning flame. "Making the choice he did was the hardest thing he ever did. He watched you from afar. He celebrated every success. He grieved when your first marriage failed. He lived his life through newspaper clippings and whispered rumors." A new cold fury began to solidify in Noah's gut, displacing some of the grief. It was an anger directed not at a ghost, but at the woman who had orchestrated this lie. His mother. She was still alive, living a life of luxury in Palm Beach, a grande dame of society who spoke of her first husband as a youthful mistake. He had been her pawn, his pain the fuel for her social ascension. But there was another piece to this puzzle. "You," he said, his focus shifting back to Elena. "She ruined you. This Dr. Croft. Was it because of him? Because you were his protege?" Elena looked down at her hands folded in her lap. The fight seemed to go out of her. "In a way, Annabelle Croft was always jealous of the professor's attention. I was his last student, and he poured all his energy into my research. She saw me as an obstacle. When he refused to endorse her for a department head position, he thought her work was derivative. She decided to destroy me, to hurt him." "The evidence?" Noah asked, his mind switching into the familiar, cold logic of a boardroom battle. "The dossier Gavriel prepared said it was irrefutable." A bitter smile touched Elena's lips. "It's easy to create irrefutable evidence when you're a master of digital forensics and your opponent is a trusting academic. She was clever. She hacked my research server, took my early drafts, and then backdated her own versions. She created a digital paper trail that made me look like the thief. No one believed me over the hard data. After the professor died, I lost the will to fight. I had no money, no one in my corner. So I just disappeared. I came to New York to be anonymous." Noah stared at her, seeing for the first time the true depth of the injustice. His father had lost his son. Elena had lost her mentor, her career, her name. Both were victims of calculated cruelty, and he, in his blind arrogance, had danced on her grave. Merchai dim, Hebionide, a girl of nothing, without a soul. His own words came back to him, tasting like poison. He had called her soulless, when in fact, she was the keeper of two souls, her own and his father's. He stood up abruptly, the sudden movement causing Julian, the manager, to jump. Noah threw a black credit card on the table. "This will cover the meal I never ate and any inconvenience we've caused," he said, his voice now imbued with a new, terrifyingly calm resolve. He looked at Elena. The pleading and confusion were gone, replaced by the steely focus that had made him a billionaire. "You're not working here anymore," he stated. It was not a question or a suggestion. It was a command. Elena stiffened. "You can't fire me." "I'm not firing you," he said. "I'm hiring you. My car's outside. We are leaving." "Leaving? To go where?" she asked, bewildered. "To fix this," he said, his gaze as hard as granite. "My father was a man of words and honor. He was destroyed by lies. You are a woman of words and honor, and you were destroyed by lies. The people who did this, my mother, this Annabelle Croft, they operate in a world of whispers and deceit. Well, I operate in a world of consequences, and I am going to introduce them to it." He didn't wait for her answer. He turned and strode out of the restaurant, the force of his personality leaving a vacuum in his wake. The entire dining room was silent, watching this impossible drama unfold. Elena sat frozen for a moment. This was not what she had expected. She had expected an apology, maybe a quiet offer of financial help. She had not expected a declaration of war. For 3 years she had lived in the shadows, a ghost resigned to her fate. Now the most powerful man she had ever met was offering her a chance to reclaim her life, fueled by the memory of the man they both loved. She looked at the letter on the table, the last testament of David Llewellyn. She thought of his gentle eyes, his passion for language, and the profound sadness he carried. He had been a man who could not fight back, but his son could. With a deep, shuddering breath, Elena stood up, untied the strings of her apron, and laid it carefully on the chair. She walked out of Ethelgard, leaving her old life behind, and stepped into the waiting black car, where Noah William was waiting to help her start a war. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated fury. Noah Williams' penthouse became a war room. Gabriel, his stoic head of security, was now the field marshal of a private army of investigators, forensic accountants, and digital warfare experts. Elena, dressed not in a waitress uniform, but in a simple, elegant pantsuit Noah's assistant had procured, found herself at the center of this maelstrom. At first, she was overwhelmed. The sheer scale and speed of Noah's resources were breathtaking. He didn't just have power, he wielded it like a scalpel. While she had spent 3 years in silent resignation, he was dismantling her enemy's life in a matter of hours. "Dr. Annabelle Croft," Gabriel reported, his voice a monotone recital of facts from a tablet. "Currently a tenured professor, married to a real estate developer, Michael Croft. 2 children, substantial mortgage on a home in Connecticut. Her husband's company, Croft Properties, is heavily leveraged. They've been using her university pension as collateral for some risky commercial real estate ventures." Noah paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, a shark in a glass tank. "The university, what's their exposure?" "They rely heavily on alumni donations," Gabriel said. "Their biggest donor is a tech billionaire, Julian Hayes. I've discovered that Hayes' company is currently in quiet negotiations to be acquired. The acquiring firm is one of ours, a subsidiary of William Capital." A predatory smile crossed Noah's face. "Is it now? How fortunate." He turned to Elena. "Tell me about the evidence, the digital files, everything." With a clarity and precision that had been dormant for 3 years, Dr. Elena Petrova came back to life. She diagrammed the server architecture, explained the metadata, and detailed the subtle, brilliant ways Croft had manipulated the timestamps to frame her. The linguist became the lead witness. The men in the room, experts in their fields, listened with rapt attention. The first strike was surgical. Noah made a call to Julian Hayes, the university's benefactor. The conversation was brief and brutally effective. He didn't threaten. He simply laid out the facts, that his firm was about to acquire Hayes' company, and that he, Noah William, was now taking a personal interest in an academic fraud case that the university had swept under the rug. He mentioned that a full public report on the university's negligent investigation, funded by an anonymous source, would be catastrophic for its reputation and, by extension, its donations. Within an hour, the president of the university called Noah personally, stammering apologies. A new independent review of the Petrova case was being opened, effective immediately. The second strike was a carpet bomb. Gavriel's team had found the digital ghost of Annabelle Croft's hack. It was buried deep, but it was there. More than that, they had delved into her finances. They discovered that 3 years ago, just after the scandal, her husband's struggling company had received a sudden, anonymous infusion of cash through a shell corporation. It took Noah's forensic accountants 6 hours to trace it. The money hadn't come from a business associate. It had come from an offshore account belonging to Noah's mother. Noah went pale when he saw the report. She paid her. My mother paid Croft to destroy my father's legacy. It wasn't just a passive lie of omission anymore. It was an active, malicious conspiracy. His mother hadn't just erased his father. She had salted the earth where his memory grew, ensuring nothing could ever flourish there again. That evening, Elena found Noah standing alone on his balcony, staring down at the city lights. The wind whipped at his suit, but he seemed not to notice the cold. I called her, he said, not looking at Elena. My mother. What did she say? Elena asked softly. She admitted it. All of it, he said, his voice hollow. She was proud of it. She said Dad was a sentimental anchor and that I needed to be free of his influence to become a success. She said she did it for me. He let out a harsh, broken laugh. She orchestrated the ruin of 2 innocent people and called it maternal love. He finally turned to face her, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it seemed ancient. The anger I've carried, the cruelty, it was her gift to me. I became the man she wanted me to be, built on a throne of her lies. Last night I insulted you with my father's words. I took something beautiful from him and twisted it into something ugly, just like she did. No, Elena said, stepping closer. You're not like her. The moment you learned the truth, you sought to make it right. She has spent a lifetime hiding from it. That's the difference. In that moment, standing high above the city, they were not a billionaire and an ex-waitress. They were just 2 people, bound by the memory of a gentle, forgotten man, trying to make sense of the wreckage. The final act was swift. Armed with the financial trail and the new digital evidence, Noah gave Annabelle Croft a choice: a full public confession and resignation, or he would release everything. Not just about the academic fraud, but about her husband's precarious business deals and the illegal payment from Noah's mother. He would ruin her, her husband, and her family's name for generations. Checkmate. The next day, a statement from the university was released. Dr. Annabelle Croft had resigned, admitting to fabricating evidence in the case against Dr. Elena Petrova. Dr. Petrova was fully exonerated, her titles and publications were reinstated, and she was issued a profound public apology. The academic world was in an uproar. Elena watched the news on the giant screen in Noah's apartment. Her name, once a synonym for disgrace, was now being spoken with reverence and sympathy. Her phone, silent for 3 years, was buzzing incessantly with calls and emails from universities around the world, all offering her positions. She had her name back. She had her life back. But as she stood there, vindicated, she felt a pang of profound sadness. The man who would have been most proud was not there to see it. Noah came to stand beside her. He would have been so happy for you, Elena, he said, as if reading her mind. For us, she corrected him gently. He would have been happy for us. Weeks turned into months. The storm of the scandal passed, leaving a changed landscape in its wake. Elena did not return to academia immediately. The thought of re-entering that world, even as a vindicated hero, felt wrong. The wounds were too deep. Instead, she accepted a different offer from Noah. He had established a new philanthropic arm of William Capital, the Llewellyn Foundation for Preserving Endangered Languages. Its mission was to fund research and create educational programs for fading tongues across the globe, from Welsh to Ainu to Navajo. He asked Elena to run it. It was a perfect synthesis of her skills and her passion. She wasn't just a researcher anymore. She was a protector, a guardian of the very thing her mentor had held so dear. She traveled, she organized, she built something new and beautiful from the ashes of her old life. Noah, too, was a changed man. The volcano of his anger had cooled, leaving behind a profound, melancholic stillness. He cut ties with his mother completely. He still ran his empire with ruthless efficiency, but the petty cruelty was gone. His employees noticed the shift. The fear he once inspired was slowly being replaced by a grudging and then genuine respect. He was still a lion, but he no longer needed to roar to prove it. He and Elena formed an unlikely, powerful bond. It wasn't romantic. It was something deeper, forged in shared grief and mutual redemption. They were the two sole members of a club, the keepers of David Llewellyn's memory. They would often have dinner, not at ostentatious places like Ethelgard, but in quiet, unassuming restaurants. They would talk for hours about linguistics, about foundation strategy, and sometimes about him. One crisp autumn afternoon, Noah's private jet touched down on a small airstrip in Wales. He and Elena had flown there together. They drove a simple rental car through winding green valleys, past ancient stone walls and flocks of grazing sheep. The air was clean and smelled of rain and earth. They came to a small, quiet churchyard overlooking a mist-shrouded valley. It took them a while, but they found the grave. It was a simple headstone, weathered by the Welsh rain. David Llewellyn, 1950, 2022, Athro, bard, friend, teacher, poet, friend. Elena placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the grave. Noah simply stood there, his hands in the pockets of his coat, a silent, imposing figure against the ancient landscape. For a long time he said nothing. The only sound was the wind rustling through the yew trees. "I don't remember much," Noah said finally, his voice thick. "I remember his hands. They were always smudged with ink, and his voice, when he read to me from the Mabinogion. I remember the sound of the words more than their meaning. He called it the music of the mountains." He knelt down, his expensive trousers pressing into the damp earth, and traced the letters of his father's name on the headstone. "He wasn't a failure who ran away," he whispered. The words meant for himself, for the little boy who had waited by the window for a father who never came back. He was a king who gave up his kingdom for his son. Elena stood beside him, a quiet presence of support. She knew there were no words she could offer that would heal a 30-year-old wound. All she could offer was the truth, and her presence. Noah looked up at her, his eyes clear. "Thank you, Elena." "For what?" "For giving me my father back," he said. "And for having a soul big enough for the both of us." She whispered in Welsh, "You're welcome, Noah." They stood there for a long time as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley. A billionaire who had conquered the world, and a linguist who had reclaimed her own, standing together in the heart of a forgotten language. They were two broken pieces of a legacy who, by finding each other, had finally become whole. The insult thrown in a moment of anger had not destroyed a life. It had, in the most unexpected way imaginable, redeemed two. The story of Noah and Elena reminds us that beneath the surface of every person, no matter their station in life, lies a hidden history, a forgotten language, a story waiting to be heard. It wasn't the billionaire's wealth or the waitress's intellect that changed their lives. It was a moment of unexpected connection, a shared language that bridged a chasm of pain and misunderstanding. It teaches us that our words have immense power, not just to wound, but to unlock the past and heal the deepest of sorrows. True strength isn't found in tearing others down, but in the courage to listen, to understand, and to see the soul that exists in everyone. If this story of redemption and the surprising power of language moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who appreciates a story of hope and second chances. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that uncover the extraordinary in the everyday. Thank you for listening.